On today's topics, we're looking at US stimulus. We're also going to be having a look at what's going on in New Zealand with the election and at Chinese GDP. Hello and welcome to another acysecurities Hot Topics video. My name is Alistair Schultz and I'm going to be your host for today's trading journey. The first thing I'm looking at today is on COVID-19. I want to give a bit of an update. I do try and do this at least once a month. So at the moment we have 39 million cases. Now not all of those are active. 27 million people have actually recovered from COVID-19 and seem to be well underway in getting on with their lives. Of course, we've had over 1 million deaths so far, and with the new rises in cases in the US, with them reporting more than 50,000 cases per day for the last 5 days, we're likely to see more needs met with people out of work. Now moving on to the stimulus talk, the reason I brought up work for a change when it comes to the COVID infections and the amount of numbers around the world is because we've been given a deadline for a deal to happen before the November 3rd presidential election. Nancy Pelosi has set a deadline for Tuesday. So that means that unless they see something, an outline at the bare minimum by the end of Tuesday, there is likely going to be no stimulus deal until after the November 3rd election. Many Americans are already suffering some pretty serious economic strain and hardship, so it will be within their interest to get it over the line. Of course, with this new revolution of 50,000 cases a day occurring for the last 5 days, it might prompt policymakers to be a little bit more proactive about trying to get people the money that they actually need. Now, of course, that's no guarantee. At this point in time, we've heard a variety of different numbers. The seemingly two big ones are 1.8 and 2.2 trillion dollars. So we can anticipate that the figure is likely to be in the between there somewhere if it's going to go through, and that's if they do the go big or go home sort of thing. Of course, there's no guarantees, and so far when it comes to the Republicans and Trump, they're not really seeing eye to eye at the moment, which will make it a little bit more difficult for him to get it across the line as well. Now, we've also heard from New Zealand. They have elected Jacinda Ardern again to be their Prime Minister, and she has had a whopping landslide victory. They basically were no votes in even some of the other parties that were available, or at the least very minimal ones. Now, investors have actually been quite unfazed about the win for Ardern. New Zealand dollar and the New Zealand bond yields have basically had little change, a little bit of a fluctuation, but nothing major. Now, the big interesting part of what's going to happen next over the next sort of 4-year term is Ardern going to make good on some of the promises that she made in her previous election, and if they are really going to come through? Because now that we've had the coronavirus and she's been able to sway a lot of right-wing voters by being a little bit more to the centre, the question is she going to keep with those sort of left side extremes, or is she going to keep tracking true in the centre bit where she's a bit more centralised about her politics? Now, of course, one of the big figures that we're going to be looking at and keeping a close eye on is how it's going to continue tracking for New Zealand. One of the other things is that it's kind of putting some of the other leaders of the world on a bit of show. The reason that we think that this election has really gone through is because she's had so much success with COVID-19. Early lockdowns, massive stimulus, all to support a relatively small country. So hopefully that means that other members around the world who might be leading a country might take it a little bit more serious or take a little bit of note as to how Jacinda Ardern has actually gone underway. Now, moving on, we've also seen some Chinese GDP figures today. There were a number of other ones on industrial production and a few others along the way, retail sales. So hopefully they contribute to as well a bit later on in the session, but we might not see too much further action. There isn't a huge amount of news to look for today unless you're looking at US equities and earnings season results. Now, in the GDP figures, we saw it for quarter 3. The actual figure was 4.9%. Now, this was after initially forecasting a 5.5% growth. Now, before that, last quarter, we saw 3.2%. Not a great deal, nothing, but it is still growth. And that is the important factor to look at here. A lot of countries are not going to see growth in 2020. So, China being on the way that even though they've had negative data compared to their forecasts and what it's actually been, they are still seeing that level of growth. At this point in time, it is forecast to be about 5.1% by the end of the year in terms of growth for so far 2020. Now, what is actually different about the Chinese situation to what we've seen across the rest of the world as to what might be contributing to this growth that we're seeing? The first two things that I actually really see are to do with infrastructure and growing industries. Instead of putting stimulus to the consumer to try and support retail side based events, we're seeing them put it into the building of new projects. And that is a very big difference. We're not seeing a lot of that across the globe. The US is obviously struggling to get that, putting money into people's pockets as opposed to putting it into trying to build new jobs, although that is the overall end game. Put enough money into people's pockets and then people will be able to afford to hire employees, hopefully. Now here in Australia, they are planning to do infrastructure projects as well, and hopefully we do see good results, but at this stage it's still quite early and we aren't seeing a great deal of money or some of those projects get built up just yet. Now in terms of news ahead of today, US Fed Powell is going to be talking later tonight. We're also going to be hearing from ECB's Christine Lagarde. So let's keep an eye on both of those. We're not entirely sure what they're going to be talking about. As always, they do have a little bit of a info pane for what their statements are going to be about, but I'd recommend you have a quick look at it, see if it's relevant to your trading for this evening, and make your own assessment then. Of course, the other one we're going to be looking at tonight is from Canada, and that is the Bank of Canada's Business Outlook Survey. So that's going to be looking at whether or not people who have been surveyed within their Business Outlook Survey are positive or negative for the economy and their businesses over the next sort of 6 months. So not a huge amount unless you are in that US equities earnings season, which all week we will see a number of different reports, including from Tesla, IBM, and Intel, as well as some of the other ones that are outside of that tech stock bracket with banking and financial entities. So keep an eye on those as the week progresses. Now, if you have any questions from today's video, perhaps you'd just like to get into contact with me, feel free to shoot me an email at talk2al@acy.com. Of course, you're also welcome to hit me up on any of my other social media channels. And of course, don't forget to like and subscribe to this video so you can get more great content from me and ACY Securities in the future. Have a great trading day ahead.